Hey guys, welcome back to Study Bubbly podcast. Today we're going to be going over part 1 of Unit 2 of Computer Science A. A little note, Unit 2 is going to be split into 3 podcasts. This first podcast is going to be covering subsections like 2.1, 2.2, and 2.8 because we figured those would be the easiest to learn together. And you'll see why in later podcasts we split them up because we figured it'd be easier to learn about methods all in one podcast and classes or specific classes that you'll be using a lot. Strings and math class in our last podcast, our third one. So today we're just going to be going over constructors, we're going to be going over intros to objects and constructors, and also wrapper classes. So just so you guys know that. And I guess we'll start with 2.1. I'm May.
I'm Jeffrey.
I'm Jason.
Didn't forget my name. Don't worry.
You forgot your name. Okay.
I'm Vince.
Ignore him. It's okay.
All right. I was debating between saying my name was Shadow, but that's not my name, so it's all right. Are we gonna start with 2.1?
Yeah, let's start with 2.1. The main question of 2.1 is about what are objects and classes, because this is all new stuff. So the first thing to know is that Java is an object-oriented language. That means pretty much everything in Java is an object. You're going to need to know about objects because objects are just so prevalent in Java. Basically, everything is some type of object, excluding, most importantly to know, is primitive data types. Those aren't objects. But as we're going to be going over later, they do have wrapper classes which can make them objects. But the important thing to know is just that there are a lot of objects. So what is the difference between an object and a variable of a primitive data type? So objects are essentially collections of variables. It can also be one variable to an object, but it can also be a collection of up to who knows how many. You could say 10, but there could easily be more variables within one object. So objects are specific variables. They have specific values unique to the object usually. But classes are how you make objects. It essentially tells what kinds of variables you are tying to that object name. It tells stuff like how many variables it has, what kinds of variables, and occasionally even the values of those variables. But usually variables tend to be object unique, and as you're setting up the object, you usually put in those values for them. And you're going to notice that some classes already exist within Java. We're going to be going over main ones in later podcasts as, again, math, integer, string, but we're going to be going over a couple that are known as wrapper classes in this podcast.
So instances, basically, they're used to describe an object while you're inside of a class. So
in REPL, we've already set up 2 classes. Our main class is where we're going to be running all of our code, but our pet class is a sample class where we're going to be making pet objects. An instance is one object created using a class. As you can see here, we've created 2 instances of the pet class, Snowball and John. If we look in pet, these are all the variables. We're going to be explaining everything about these fairly soon, but it's important to know that these are instances. Snowball and John are the instances of the pet class.
Yeah.
And yeah, does someone else want to explain more about instances and how to set up objects or instantiating objects?
I can do that.
No, just kidding.
Yeah,
No.
Go Jeffrey.
No.
No?
No. Jeffrey, you're not allowed to
Please,
do that.
I can't talk for the first 10
No.
minutes of the podcast. Please.
Someone said no.
No.
Jeffrey,
What?
Jeffrey, just go.
Yeah.
Just
No,
go,
Jeffrey,
just
you
go,
already
just
said
go.
you're gonna do it. You gotta do it.
No. So, as you can see on May's screen, this is how you instantiate an object. So, you have the class name, which is pet, followed by what you want to name the instance. And you have to have the keyword new here because it signifies that you're making a new instance of the class, you're gonna want to have the class name once again, pet, and then followed by all of your parameters that are going to go into your object. And we're going to go more into the structure and the way constructors work later. And constructors are what you use to instantiate instances of an object, instances of a class.
Right.
And these parameters inside of your initializer, those are going to represent variables that are going to define the instance you're making of the class.
Right. The values of the variables.
Yeah.
Yeah, from the pet class, yeah.
So, yeah, now we're going to start talking about constructors. Constructors specifically are this part of the code. They're known as a method, but it's important to know that they're a special type of method. We're going to be going more into methods in our second podcast, but constructors are a special type of method, and they usually use a special type of format, which we can see here in PET. We've got 2 constructors set up for you guys that we're going to be talking about.
So variables usually are private. Public ones are available to any class, so you can access them in different classes. And the private ones are within their own class, which is, in this case, class pet.
Just for like public variables,
Jason, it might be
imagine.
time to bust out the ASMR.
Oh, all right. So just for like public variables,
ASMR.
imagine that you're making a character in a video game. All of the sliders you would do for how you would adjust like what your character looks like are basically public variables because you have access to them.
Yeah, so that means you could basically like access how to change your character at like any point in the game. But if it's a specific game, like I don't know, like Skyrim or something, and you can only choose like how your appearance looks in like the beginning, that's essentially our constructor. That's where we're setting up all of these variables at the beginning, and then we can't really change them later. But you change them through this. These are your sliders to make your character look how you want.
And you can see here, our class name is pet. So up here, you can see that all of these private variables are what we've chosen to define our pet. Because when you look at a pet, you think, how many legs do they have? Do they have eyes? What's their height? And what color they are?
Eyes. I still why has eyes? That's
because it's asking if they have eyes.
Oh my god.
Like, do you ever look at a horse and you're just wondering?
I see horses and I'm like, how many eyes do they have? That's
you
like
couldn't
the first
have
question
done
on my
how
mind.
many eyes. No, do they have eyes?
I mean, like usually it's like 2 or none. So
I mean, there's one-eyed, cat or like, whatever snowball.
Well,
yeah,
I mean,
but
it
how
still has
common are
eyes,
those?
So it's
Yeah, they still have eyes.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right.
Moving on.
Yeah, so I guess we'll talk about constructors. So when you set up a constructor, it has to be public because when you create an object, you're usually going to be doing it in another class, such as our main class, where we made these. Because if you make it in its own class, there's a good chance you're probably, like, usually other classes are where you have methods where you can run lines of code. Like, this is a specific one, the main method where you're going to be running all your stuff. They just have to be public so you can create objects in different classes is what you need to know.
Right.
Yeah.
So a constructor has a defined set of parameters. So those are like the temporary variables. So for example, inside this, if I'm not wrong, it would be like height and color, right?
Yeah, we've got legs, height, and color. And then
For
over
that one,
here,
yeah.
we've got height and color in this constructor.
Yeah.
So in the parameters, as you can see in main, what we're going to be putting here in the corresponding little sectioned off by like the commas area is what we want that to be equal to. So obviously it's going to be the same data types, like it goes int, double, and then string. And that's the same way we have it here. Like 3 legs, height of 15, and it's the color white. So now we want all of your objects are going to have these variables. The problem with these parameters, variables as they're called, they only exist within this specific section of code. After this section of code is run, they don't exist anymore. So we want them to be permanent. We want them to be part of our object. So what we do is we set these variables to the values of these parameters within this section of code, so that once this code is executed and all of these they're gone, we still have something to remember them by, like our number of legs. So there's two ways to change the values. It's usually easier, I guess, to take your instance variable right here and just put it down here and set it equal to the corresponding variable. This is if they have different names. So if they have the same name, like if I just had height equals height, it's going to get confused, and what it's going to default to is using this height. But we want it to use this height. So if you're like dead set on having these have the same name, you can use this dot height, and it'll call the height for the class, and it will be equal to height within this constructor. And as you can see, we used it both times here for height and color of our pet. And as I'm sure you guys can see, we have two constructors. So the thing about having multiple constructors is they have to have different parameters, essentially. So in this first one, the names of the variables don't matter, because what your code is looking for is variable types. So when you set up a constructor in main like this and you put in all your little variables to be set as the parameters, what it's looking for is really the data types, because it's not going to be able to tell just from the names or anything. So if you have two constructors, like if I added an integer for, say, number of hairs. Oh my god, I can't type. Right? If I added an integer for number of hairs on your pet, to your code, it might be that these variables mean completely different things in what we want them to do, but the code's not going to see it that way because it's the same sequence of variable types and the same number of variable types. So it's going to be like, well, I don't know which one you want me to choose, and it's going to get annoyed, and you're never going to be able to use this constructor because it's going to default to this one. And then if you ever wanted to count your number of hairs, well, it sucks because now it's getting set to however many legs you have, and you're going to have too many legs. It's a real problem.
Assuming your cat isn't bald.
Yeah. So an easy fix to this is if you want to just set different... If you want it to have the same types of variables, but you want it to... You can change the order or like sequence of variable types, and it'll be fine. Just make sure it's not the same sequence and the same number of variables. If you can follow those two rules, no matter how many constructors you make, it'll work. You know what? Let's make this a little different. We can change this one since, let's just say John doesn't have legs, right? He just doesn't have legs, period. It's not even a thought. So we can just get rid of this. So now it's using our second constructor. And it basically finds it just through looking at the data. As I said before, it looks at the data types. And as you can see here, we have a double for height and a string for color, and that is the order and number of data types we have here. And that's essentially constructors and like using multiple constructors. You don't have to have multiple.
Right. And having multiple constructors defining a single class, that's what's called overloading constructors.
Right, yeah. That's an important computer science term you should know.
Again, overloading constructors, it's when you have multiple constructors that define a single class, each with like a different combination of variables. So one unique overloaded constructor you can have is the no argument constructor. Essentially, that constructor, it follows the form of if you look in the main class at the bottom here on line 28, how you would initialize a no argument instance is you would have the class name, which is pet. What should we name our new pet?
I
I
don't
think
know.
we should name it Lasagna after my rabbit. The rabbit
Lasagna.
I had years ago.
Right. So we have a pet named Lasagna, and we don't know what color it is. We don't know how many legs it has, if it has eyes or not, or its height. So we're just
we
gonna
just don't know anything about it.
yeah. So we're just gonna have them as the default values or null.
No.
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 I mean,
So as you can see here,
That's
we have
accurate for this pet.
right. You're gonna use the new keyword, not null. So yeah, as you can see here,
It's
there's no
fine, but
parameters that are really defining it. So what it's going to default to is either the default values, or if it doesn't have any default values, null. And now getting into default values, the more computer sciencey term for that is presets. So
okay, right.
yeah,
So the important thing about the no argument constructor is, so classes do have default constructors, but that is only if you haven't defined any constructors for your class. So while we were correct in saying that there are default constructors and that they would look like this, if pet didn't have any constructors, that would create an object by default because classes always have constructors. But if you define them like we have and you want a no argument constructor too, you're going to have to define it yourself. Because now that you've created a constructor for your class is going to want to use that one instead of the default. The default no argument constructor, once you make one, it doesn't exist anymore. You got to make your own. So like, we can show it right here because it's really easy. Like public, pet, and then just none. There's your constructor. Congrats, guys. You did it.
Nice.
There's nothing in there. That's the default. So I think if we run it, it'll probably work. But yeah.
right. So at the top here in the pet class, you can see all of our instance variables. Essentially what presets are is they initialize these variables to default values. So if you're making an instance with an overloaded class or a no argument class that doesn't contain one of the variables, it's still going to have a value aside from null. So if we make the default value for number of legs equal, and if we make that 4, back in the main class, when we defined lasagna, they're no longer going to have an unknown amount of legs. They're going to have 4 legs. And we can do that with any of these instance variables. For example, double height, we can have the default value for height as 35.6 centimeters, or whatever unit this is. Color, we can have that default to brown,
Okay.
etc. You get the idea.
Wait, can I say one more thing about the no argument constructor
Yeah,
that I
sure.
think we might have glossed over?
Go for it.
So the thing about classes is convention. Usually you're going to capitalize your class name. As you can see in main and pet here, they're both capitalized. And as you can see, I'm sure you've noticed that like string, wow, it's like weirdly capitalized, right? That's because string is actually a class. We're going to be going into more detail, but that's another reason it's not a primitive data type. Primitive data types can only have like one variable type, and that's why they're like, all this lowercase right here. So since this is a class, that means this is an object, right?
Right.
So since it's an object, objects can have the value null, which is essentially nothing. If you try to call it, return it, whatever, it's just going to say null. But the problem with primitive data types is they don't have that option. If you try to call on them and there's nothing in here, like if this doesn't equal anything, we never set it to anything, and you try to call it, it's just going to be like, that doesn't exist, and your program is going to fail. So sometimes you don't want that, right? So there's this special thing called wrapper classes. Essentially, they get around that problem of like, you're not able to set your int to null or something, because now it's called an integer, which we're going to be talking about now, I guess. And this is the last section. This is 2.8, wrapper classes and all that. So get ready for the end of the podcast now, I guess. Don't worry, it's almost over. Okay, so who wants to explain wrapper classes?
Okay, so basically a wrapper class is like, it's kind of like a class designed around an integer.
Some data types have some primitive data types, have special classes that have essentially the same name. Like for int, I'll write it here, they have integer to int and double to double. They have them for like other primitive data types, but these are the ones you're going to be seeing, especially for practice.
And note the capital I and capital D.
Right,
because
yeah.
they're now classes, not just primitive types.
Right. So if you create an integer instead of an int, that's going to be an object. And the thing about ints is you can usually set them to integers. Like if I wanted to make, like it'll error right now because it doesn't have any value set for it, but I'm going to do it anyway, just like as an example. So private integer better leg now, because now we got all the nice class stuff we can use for it. So I could just set it to leg num, and it would work because this data type and this class are connected. It's kind of similar to, you can see it here even. There are two ways to instantiate a string. It's similar to this, you know. You can either put like the new string and then and then just put like brown inside of it, like new. Oh my god. You can instantiate it like this or the way it was before, and it's the same for integers. You can set it to an int, or you can like instantiate it like this, like we've gone over here, because it's a class, but it's a special kind of class, which is built into this language. And it's the same for the wrapper class of double.
Unboxing is making the wrapper class the primitive type, and autoboxing is the conversion from a primitive type to wrapper class.
Right here. Yeah, I'll write that down.
So one way you can think of it is autoboxing. You're wrapping the primitive type, you're boxing the primitive type with the wrapper class, and unboxing is like you're unboxing the wrapper class to get the primitive type.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. So yeah, as you can see, I just wrote a quick little thing to see here, if that helps you, like seeing it visually instead of just hearing it.
Right.
So I think that's pretty much all we have to talk about today. Of course, if you have any questions, you can ask any of us, and like we're available to answer questions for you guys if you're on our server. And our Discord server, Study Bubbly, look it up, I guess, if you haven't already.
It's on our website.
So you can just ask us questions anytime about this first podcast content,
or any homework questions you have in general relating to
any
AP class really.
Yeah, well,
just don't give us like test questions. Thank you everyone so much for watching. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe with all of your friends. Also make sure to check out other.
Smash that like button.
All right.
Subscribe.
Yes, we're YouTubers now. We're YouTubers now.
Yeah.
Also, make sure to check out all of our other videos and podcasts, as well as our free notes from our website. And links and files are all in the description. And I guess we'll see y'all next time. See ya.
See ya. Bye.